Hi everyone, so in this video today I'm just going to be going through my predictions for the 2019 A-Level Psychology paper on the AQA spec, and this is for paper 1. So first off I'm going to be looking at attachment. First, let's quickly look at what was in the 2018 paper. There was a question on the impacts of institutionalisation, so that's the Romanian orphan studies. This was also in the 2017 paper, therefore I feel it's much less likely to be in this paper. There were questions on animal studies, and there was a 16 marker on the learning theory and Bowlby's monotropic theory. So with that one you could kind of talk about both, which was quite a nice 16 marker I felt. What kind of things do I think could come up in the 2019 paper? So first off you've got the role of the father, which I feel has been quite overlooked in the past, and I do feel it's quite a big thing, and I just think there's a strong possibility this one could come up, even in a small question. I do think there's a strong chance that Bowlby's theory of maternal deprivation is going to come up, so questions on the critical period, with that being the first 30 months of life, the effects it has on development, if like maternal deprivation, so intellectual development and emotional development, leading on to affection of psychopathy, and then quite a key point is Bowlby's 44 Thieves study with the procedure findings and any AO3 to do with that. I think that could definitely be a 16 mark question. I think there's enough content there for it to be a 16 mark question. I thought it was going to come up last year and it didn't, so I do think there's a strong chance that one will come up. You've also got the influence of early attachment on later relationships. So with that one, that's the internal working model. So with that one, you've got the love quizzes, you've got the relationships in later life, relationships with romantic partners, and relationships in adulthood as a parent, and all of that kind of thing. I do think there's quite a good chance that would come up as a question also. And then finally, also got Schaefer and Emerson's stages of attachment, as well as the types of attachment. So this is the strange situation, as well as the types of attachment being your secure, your insecure resistant, and your insecure avoidant, as well as a disorganised attachment if you want to go that one step further. I do feel like this is quite a generic question in that everyone seems to know this, and it does come up quite regularly in the papers. As you can see, it was also in the 2017 paper, but I do feel like even a matching activity, this is the kind of thing that does tend to come up every time, so it's a key thing you definitely need to know. Next up, we've got social influence. What kind of things were in the 2018 paper for this section? So we've got the agentic state coming up, minority influence, which was an application question, and I think will generally be an application question if it does come up, and then reasons as to why people conform. So this was the 16 marker, and in this you could have spoken about NSI, ISI, or you could even have gone the other way and spoken about Zimbardo and Ash. So what do I think could come up in the 2019 paper this year? We've got Milgram's research, which is definitely a big thing and hasn't really been seen so much in the past. And within this topic, it's one of the three big studies. So Milgram's research, you've obviously got the shocks, you need to know a rough estimate as to the percentages as to how many people carried on. You need to kind of know the prompts that were given, how many people carried on, and then your AO3 points. There are many for this one. For example, the Sheridan and King study on the shocks given to the real puppy. You've got the Jus de la Mort documentary TV presented, which was the replication, and all of these things are key supporters, and I do think there's a high chance this could be a 16 mark question. You've also got resistance social influence, so this is the locus of control. I definitely think this is going to come up. I mean, I thought it was going to come up last year, and again this one didn't, so I do think there's a high possibility that this one would come up, because in this one you've got kind of two elements. You've got the social support, so why don't people conform, and you can talk about Ash and Milgram and Zimbardo there. And then you've also, as I said before, you've got that locus of control, which is on the continuum, and there is just key points of the internal and external points of validity that you can talk about, as well as lots of research there to support these points. You've also got the social influence and social change section. So this is the part, as I've put on here, that you can see. that does have the drawing attention, consistency, deep processing, the augmentation principle, the snowball effect, and social cryptonesia, I think again there is a strong possibility this could be a 16 marker because, there's so many things you could talk about. There's lots of AO3 information. I also think this could be an application question. There's a lot of scope for it to be an application question, so I don't see why this one couldn't come up. And finally, you've got the authoritarian personality question, which was in the 2017 paper. I think it might have been an 8 marker. I don't think it was a 16 mark question. I could be wrong, but I know it was there. But I do think there's a chance that this one could come up, even in a small way. So this one, you've got a door-nose questionnaire, and, there are lots of things here that you could do, even characteristics of the authoritarian personality, small points that you could just come up. Next up, we've got memory. What was in the 2018 paper for this section? So you had elements of the working memory model, a memory experiment, which had a key focus on research methods, strengths of the working memory model, the cognitive interview, and the AO1 and AO3 of forgetting. So what do I think is going to come up in the 2019 paper? So parts of coding, capacity and duration, which are quite basic elements that can kind of crop up as small mark questions across all the papers, as in paper 1 each year, because they're just quite general points. They're also in the 2017 paper, and I don't see why they wouldn't be a small question in this paper. So with that, you've got the Baddeley research, you've got Peterson and Peterson, you've got Jacobs, you've got Miller, you've got all of that kind of stuff. I also think the multi-store model could come up. Last year there was an emphasis on the working memory model. I think this year could be the multi-store model. So that's the sensory register, short-term memory store, long-term memory store. You have some research on that one. With that one, you could also bring in the coding capacity and duration of the different parts. You can bring in the research from that. So I do think there's a lot to be had with this one. I just think it's quite a nice 16 marker to have as well, if it were to come up. And finally, eyewitness testimonies. So this was a question in 2017 with a key focus on misleading information. I think this time it could be on anxiety, it could be on both, it could be a comparison question asking you to compare how anxiety and misleading information both affect eyewitness testimonies and how they kind of compare and contrast together. I do think that's a bit of a long shot, though. I don't think they do that in paper 1. I just think that's a bit too much for paper 1. But I do think that anxiety with eyewitness testimonies could come up. Next, we have psychopathology. What was in the 2018 paper for this section? For this, there was a big emphasis on research methods. There wasn't so much information based on psychopathology. So you had a scatter graph that you had to make, you had the different types of stats tests that were used, and you had to kind of explain why these stats tests were used. And then the focus here was on depression, specifically the cognitive theories of depression. So that's Beck and Ellis, so the ABC model, the kind of negative triad. And so my predictions for the 2019 paper would be perhaps definitions of abnormality. Again, with this one, I think it's kind of one of those small questions that could come up every year. So as you can see, it's come up in the 2017 paper, and I don't see why a small question couldn't come up on one of these again, because there are 4 of them. So that's 4 lots of AO3 points. I think it's quite a big part, but quite an easy part to get in also. I think if phobias were to come up, it's most likely to be the explanations of phobias, because treatments was come up back in 2017, treatments being the flooding and systematic desensitisation. So the explanations of phobias, I think, could definitely come up. And so finally, you've got OCD, which I think a question, a 16 mark, possibly, maybe an 8 marker, you don't know, could be on the treatments. That's the drug therapies to treating OCD. So with that, you've got the SSRIs, you've got your tricyclics, SNRIs, combining SSRIs with the other treatments, so CBT. And I think with this one, it would be quite a nice one because there's quite a lot of keywords that you could just kind of slot in there. So you've got your neurons, your synapses, your chemicals, postsynaptic, presynaptic, receptors, all of that kind of thing, which I just think would be quite a nice 16 marker, perhaps. That's not to say that explanations of OCD won't come up. I also think that's a possibility, but I do think treatments are perhaps more likely, but you just never know. And then, of course, if it were to be the explanations of OCD, you have your genetic explanations, which are your candidate genes. You've got the fact that OCD is polygenic and the fact that there's different types of OCDs. And then you've also got your neural explanations, so that's serotonin and your decision-making systems. And there is a lot of research to go alongside both of them components, as well as a lot of AO3 material. So, I mean, they may split that up to just genetic or just neural, or they could possibly have both. You don't know. So finally, I feel it's quite key to point out that research methods do come up all the time, despite being a sole section on its own in paper 2. It does tend to crop up in both paper 1 and paper 3 also. So in the 2017 paper, the research methods questions were quite prominent within the social influence section, as well as in the AS 2016 paper also being in the social influence section. And then in 2018 they were in the psychopathology question. So this kind of raises the question as to where research methods will be most prominent. You don't know. So with this point, I'm just emphasising the fact that research methods are likely to come up. I do think it could perhaps be the types of statistical tests that you're using, and you have to explain why that test has been picked. So for example, if it's interval, ordinal or nominal data, if it's correlational design, that kind of thing. I think it could perhaps be a graph. There was a graph last year. There's just so many things it could be, so just make sure you do revise research methods. So with all of that, I just wanted to say good luck to you all in May with your exam, and let's hope that some of these predictions are correct. Obviously make sure you revise everything, I think that's a given, but maybe revise more so certain parts. But yeah, just don't exclude anything, and good luck.